Good afternoon, class.
Good afternoon po.
Good afternoon. Okay, so for those who have good connection, kindly turn on naman your video so I'll get to see your beautiful faces. Okay, and my apologies for the confusion kanina. Memory gap si Doktor. Sa dami ng mga lecture ko kasi litong-lito na ako. Anyway, so 1 to 3 pala yung lecture ko supposedly sa inyo. I thought it was 10 to 12. Kaya nagkamali kayo ng kita doon sa label. Di ba nagalit si Dr. Matthews?
Hindi po. Okay
Hindi
lang po.
naman. Okay. So anyway, my task for today is to talk about the meninges and ventricles. Na laboratory orientation na ba to sa inyo?
Yung diencephalon po.
So nabanggit. Okay, so that's good. Kahit paano you already have a background on it. So we will be talking in details the meninges and ventricles of the brain. So our topic outline will be to be able to describe the anatomy of the coverings of the brain and the spinal cord, be able to describe and look into the anatomic locations of the ventricles of the brain. Of course, we should also be discussing the formation of the cerebrospinal fluid and how it flows, and also to insert some clinical conditions with regards to the meninges in the brain as well as the cerebrospinal fluid abnormalities. Okay. Again, disclaimer: I am not a neurologist, but an obstetrician and gynecologist. So for some disease entity, especially with regards to management, I might not be able to answer. Okay, so if okay with you too, please allow me to record this lecture just in case hindi ko ma-discuss sa ibang section. Okay lang ba, class?
Yes po.
Okay, thank you. I'll start recording. Okay, so again, good afternoon. This will be our topic outline. So when we talk about the brain and spinal cord, it is being protected not just by the skull, but also by three protective membranes, or what we also call the meninges. So it includes from the outer to the innermost portion, the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and then the pia mater. Okay, so in this illustration, you'll be able to appreciate the sagittal section of the brain, of the skull, the brain included, in case you'll be able to see the different layers of the meninges. Okay, from outside going in, you have the dura mater, which is the strongest, followed by your arachnoid, and then followed by your pia mater. So those are the meninges of the brain. And we also know that this is continuous with the spinal cord. So we will talk about it also later. Okay, so starting off, let's talk about the dura mater. Okay, so as you can see here, the dura mater is at this area. Okay, and above that, you'll be able to appreciate different blood vessels as well, like that of your diaphoproic veins, your emissary veins. Okay, so in any event that there are traumas, these blood vessels can be severed or injured, causing blood. But we know that the skull is a strong structure, so saan siya napupunta? Where does that blood go? Okay, so later on, we will talk about clinical correlations with regards to this. Okay, so going back, I would like you to focus on this encircled picture, and that is your arachnoid villi. Okay, coupled with your arachnoid granulations. Okay, I'm telling you this one right now because this one we will talk about again when we go to your dural venous sinuses. Okay, which are all important structures for your cerebrospinal fluid and your cerebral blood flow. Okay, so starting off with the dura mater of the brain, the strongest layer of the skull or of the brain, it is composed of two layers, the endosteal layer and the meningeal layer. Okay, the endosteal layer is the one covering the inner surface of the skull bones. Okay, so when you go to the laboratory and they ask you to harvest the brain, you cannot detach the endosteal layer because it is strongly adherent with the periosteum on the outside of the skull bones. So it is adherent to the base of the skull. Okay, the endosteal layer of the dura mater is not continuous with the spinal cord. Okay, it is the meningeal layer that is continuous with the spinal cord. Okay, so this one will just show you by illustration the endosteal layer. So these two layers of the dura mater has the physiologic space that we usually tell our students. This physiologic space or gap that you see here is what you will be able to appreciate when you look into the cerebrospinal flow na discussion. Okay, because the arachnoid granulations as well as the arachnoid villi that I have mentioned are all important structures for your CSF flow as well as the blood flow as well. Okay, so they are closely united, the endosteal and the meningeal layer, except along certain lines, and they are separated to form the venous sinuses. So this is the physiologic gap that I am talking about. Okay, so this one is just a closer look of the endosteal layer, which is closely adherent to the skull or the base of the skull. Okay, moving on, the meningeal layer or the dura mater proper is a dense, strong, fibrous membrane covering the brain. It also provides tubular sheets for cranial nerve, and this time this is continuous already with the dura mater of the spinal cord through the foramen magnum. Again, it is the meningeal layer of the dura mater that is continuous with the spinal cord, not the endosteal layer. Okay, so here you'll be able to appreciate the meningeal layer, which is almost attached to the brain tissue already. Okay, but here you will be able to separate that when you harvest the brain, you'll be able to separate and open it like a book, yung leaf ng book. Madali lang siyang tanggalin kasi medyo makapal siya. Okay, so this meningeal layer will send inward four septa, which will divide the cranial cavity into freely communicating spaces that plunge the subdivisions of the brain. Okay, what will be the function of this septa? It will restrict the displacement of the brain associated with acceleration and deceleration and when the head is moved. Okay, remember that your brain is like floating there in the skull, filled with fluid. Okay, so it will be able to support itself by way of the septa, and it will not be affected by movement of the head or sudden acceleration, especially during vehicular accidents. Okay, so these four septa, the biggest will be the falx cerebri, which is a sickle-shaped fold of dura mater that lies in the midline between two cerebral hemispheres. So it is the falx cerebri that divides your cerebral hemisphere. The narrow anterior end, as you see in this illustration, is attached to the frontal crest and the crista galli. Okay, here at this area. While the broad posterior end blends in the midline with the upper surface of the tentorium cerebelli. Okay, so at this area. Okay, so that is your falx cerebri. Kaya siya sinabing cerebri because it is two cerebral hemispheres. Okay, now let's proceed with tentorium cerebelli. From the word itself, tents over the cerebellum. Okay, so it is a crescent-shaped fold of the dura mater that roofs over the posterior cranial fossa. So it covers the upper surface of the cerebellum and supports the occipital lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. So the one responsible for restricting movement on the posterior parts of the brain will be that of the tentorium cerebelli. Okay, tents over the cerebellum, which is posteriorly located. Also, in the anterior edge, there is a gap of that tentorium cerebelli. That gap is what we call the tentorial notch. This is necessary for the passage of the midbrain. Okay, so it is where the midbrain will insert to. Okay, next we have the falx cerebelli, which is small, sickle-shaped because it's falx, fold of dura mater attached to the internal occipital crest. So it projects forward between two cerebellar hemispheres. So its posterior fixed margin contains the occipital sinus. Okay, the sinuses we will talk about later. Okay, so if you're going to look at this illustration, the falx cerebelli is around this area. Okay, so here you'll be able to appreciate the different septa. We have the falx cerebri, which divides your two cerebral hemisphere. You have the tentorium cerebelli, which tends over or roots over the cerebellum. And we have here the falx cerebri. Okay. We also have the diaphragma sella, which is part of the dura mater that will form the roof of the sella turcica. Okay, so it is a small opening on its center and allows the passage of the stalk of the hypophysis cerebra or the pituitary gland, as you can see here. So this one is the diaphragma sellae, as you can see in this small inset picture. Okay. Another illustration of the different septa, the falx cerebri, the tentorium cerebelli, the falx cerebelli, and the diaphragma sellae. Okay. Now, with regards to the dural nerve supply of the meninges, it's primarily coming from the branches of the trigeminal nerve. Okay, so it's above the level of tentorium cerebelli. It produces referred pain to an area of the skin on the same side of the head. So if it's the trigeminal nerve that's being involved, it's usually on the same side of the head. Other nerve supplies of these meninges includes that of the vagus nerve, the first three cervical spinal nerve, and branches from the sympathetic trunk. Okay? It contains sensory nerve endings that are sensitive to stretching. That's why whenever there are increased in intracranial pressures or there is hydrocephalus, then there will be a feeling of stretching or feeling of pain over the scalp because the dural nerve supplies contain sensory nerve endings. Okay, in relation to the tentorium cerebelli, when it is below the level of the tentorium, it produces the referred pain to the back of the neck and back of the scalp along the distribution of the greater occipital nerve. Okay, so if you're going to look at this illustration, above the tentorium affectation will be the trigeminal nerve, okay, affecting the forehead and the face. Below the tentorium, it will be at the back of the head and the neck, primarily from the cervical nerves C1 to C3. Okay, the trigeminal nerve branches includes that of the ophthalmic and the mandibular, as you can see here. Okay, so depending on whether it is above or below the tentorium. Okay, so they usually present with meningeal headache. Okay, so again, looking at this illustration, the tentorium cerebelli is at this area. So depending whether it is again above or below. If it's above, primarily it's the trigeminal nerve branches like that of the V1 as well as the V2. Okay. Now let's proceed with the blood supply. Okay, the dural arterial blood supply comes from different branches like that of the internal carotid, the maxillary, the ascending pharyngeal, occipital, and vertebral arteries. But what is clinically important for us will be the middle meningeal artery. Why is it clinically important? Because of its location. Okay, so this middle meningeal artery arises from the maxillary artery in the infratemporal fossa, and it will enter the cranial cavity and will run forward and laterally in the groove on the upper surface of the squamous part of the temporal bone. And we all know that the temporal bone is around in this area. So this one is at risk for a trauma, for blunt force, secondary from a vehicular accident, or nagsuntukan. So usually we do shielding of our face, including in this area, kasi nandyan yung middle meningeal artery. Okay, so it lies between the meningeal and then endosteal layer of the dura. Okay, like what I've said, this middle meningeal artery is clinically important because it is usually damaged during head injuries, especially from a blunt trauma. Okay, because again of its location, as you can see here. The yellow shaded portion is the temporal bone, and you can see here the inserting is the middle meningeal artery, giving off its branches. Okay. So now let's proceed with the venous drainage of the brain. The venous drainage of the brain occurs through a system of cerebral and cerebellar veins. Okay, eventually it will drain into dural venous sinuses and empty into the internal jugular veins. Together with the external jugular vein, which drains the scalp and the face, it will return venous blood from the head and neck region back to the heart. Okay, the superficial structures of the head, like the scalp and the skull, will also drain into the dural venous sinuses, but this time via the emissary and the epiflowic veins, as you have seen a while ago in the illustration. Okay, so dalawa ang kanyang venous drainage, from the internal jugular veins and then to the emissary and epiflowic veins, depending on what is the structure involved. Okay. The dural venous sinuses, as I have shown you a while ago, are the physiologic gap. Okay, but it is actually divided into two groups of sinuses, the upper group and the lower group. Okay, this sinuses is situated between the layers of the dura mater, and the main function of which is to receive blood from the brain through the cerebral veins and cerebrospinal fluid from the subarachnoid space through the arachnoid villi, as you saw in the illustration a while ago. Okay, this dural venous sinuses is being lined by endothelium, which is thick-walled but devoid of muscles and without valves. So imagine the circulation of the blood only throughout the entire system because it's like a closed system. So wala siyang outflow tract paglabas niya na ng spinal cord. Okay, because there are no valves, it also does not contract. Okay, so ang kanyang pressure is basically the same. Okay, hindi siya yung kapag mataas, tataas din yung pressure. Okay, it can increase depending if there is a pathology, but physiologically, hindi siya basta-basta mag-i-increase because it is devoid of muscles, walang areas of vasoconstriction, okay, and it does not have valves. Okay, now what are these upper and lower group of sinuses? Okay, we'll start off with the upper group first. Okay, so in this one, you'll be able to appreciate the septa together with the dural venous sinuses. Like what was the definition kanina? It is inserted into the septa of the meninges. Okay, so the uppermost part is the superior sagittal sinus, which occupies the upper fixed border of the falx cerebri. So imagine your septa in this area. So inserted into that is the superior sagittal sinus. Okay, the straight sinus, which is a continuation of the superior sagittal sinus and crossing over to make the inferior sagittal sinus, that will be your straight sinus. So it occupies the line of junction of the falx cerebri with the tentorium cerebelli. Okay, the tentorium cerebelli, imagine it along this area. Okay, so that is the straight sinus. And then the transverse sinus are paired and begins at the internal occipital protuberance. It is continuous with your sigmoid sinus. Okay, as you can see here. The sigmoid sinus directs the continuation of the transverse sinus and eventually become continuous with the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein. Okay, and lastly, the occipital sinus here occupies the attached margin of the falx cerebri. Okay, so imagine again the septa at this area, and that is your falx cerebri. So it is where your occipital sinus is located. So that is for your upper group of sinuses. Okay, for the lower group of sinuses, it includes your inferior sagittal sinus, which is again the connection between the inferior and the superior is the transverse sinus that you see here. Okay, so in the inferior sagittal sinus is located within the inferior portion of the falx cerebri. Okay, the cavernous sinus, as you see here, is formed by the major brains at the base of the skull. The superior petrosal sinus, as you see here, is found in the groove of the petrous part of the temporal bone. Okay, and again, your transverse sinus. Okay, so remember, when we talk about sinuses, come your exam, it will be mostly on where it is located. Okay, because basically it's just the dural venous blood flow. Okay, now the confluence of the sinuses, as you can see in this illustration, connects to the superior sagittal, the straight, and the occipital sinuses. Okay, because all of those sinuses drain into the confluence of the sinuses. Okay, so it is found laterally to the internal occipital protuberance of the occipital bone. Okay, so we're done with the dura mater. Let's now proceed with the second layer, the arachnoid mater. Okay, it is a delicate, impermeable membrane covering the brain and lying between the pia mater internally and the dura mater externally. So it is separated from the dura by a potential space, or what we call the subdural space, and separated from the pia by the subarachnoid space, which is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid. So the subarachnoid space is a real space. Okay. This arachnoid matter is covered with flattened mesothelial cells. So as you can see here, you'll be able to appreciate the arachnoid matter, as well as the superior cerebral veins beneath the arachnoid matter. Okay, so all of these um, layers are important because for every layer, there will be corresponding blood vessels. So meaning for head injuries, you will be able to see trauma to the or severed blood vessels causing hematoma or blood clots. Okay. So what is important with the arachnoid matter is actually this area or the dural venous sinus. Okay, so this arachnoid projects into the venous sinuses, which is actually site for CSF diffusion into the bloodstream. Okay, your CSF is coming from the inside. Okay, and then it will go out to your arachnoid granulation. Okay, or arachnoid villi. Also, the resorption of the CSF happens at this area. Okay. Next, after the arachnoid matter, we have the pia mater, which is a vascular membrane covered by flattened mesothelial cells, like your arachnoid matter. Okay, so it closely invests the brain, covering the gyri and descending into the deepest sulci. Okay, so ito yung nag-i-insert mismo dun sa nooks and crannies ng inyong brain. Okay, it also forms the tela choroidea of the roof of the third and fourth ventricle and fuses with the ependyma to form your choroid plexus in the lateral, third, and fourth ventricle. So tela choroidea plus the ependymal cells will form your choroid plexus, which is important for the production of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so here you'll be able to appreciate the pia mater. Okay, it also invests into the sulcus as well as gyrus. Okay, depending on where it is located. Okay, so this one will just differentiate the dura mater as to its strength and consistency. The dura mater is like a dense connective tissue, while your pia mater is delicate connective tissue. Okay, so after all the meninges, we have discussed it already. Let's now proceed with the spaces. Okay, these spaces are important clinically and physiologically. The subarachnoid space physiologically for the cerebrospinal fluid, and the potential spaces, your epidural space or extradural space, as well as your subdural space, are potential spaces for possible hematoma from injuries of the blood vessels. Okay, and also the dural venous sinus for your subdural space. Okay, so again, these are the layers now showing you the different spaces. Okay, so these spaces exist between the meningeal layers. The epidural or extradural space is a potential space between the two dural layers. It is called potential space because it is secondary to the accumulation of hematoma coming from injuries or ruptured blood vessels. Okay, the subdural space is also a potential space between the dura and arachnoid matter. And this is true for your dural venous sinuses. Okay, the subarachnoid space is a real space between the arachnoid and pia mater, which contains the cerebral vasculature and the cerebrospinal fluid. So, for the three spaces, it is only the subarachnoid space that is the real space or the true space. Okay? So the subdural space, as you can see here, this one is the subarachnoid space. Okay? The subdural space is around this area. Okay? So pwedeng adherent in some areas, but in some areas, there will be this dural venous sinuses or potential spaces. Okay? So again, here is the picture of your subarachnoid space, as you can see here, which is the true space because the cerebrospinal fluid will be circulating in that area or in those areas. Okay, your epidural space is above the dura mater. So this one, if you're looking into my moving arrow, is a potential space for possibility of fluid accumulation or hematoma accumulation coming from a severe superficial cerebral vessels. Okay? The subarachnoid space are relatively narrow space over the surface of the cerebral hemisphere. Okay? But sometimes it becomes wider in areas at the base of the brain. Okay, the widest space is called subarachnoid cisterns. When you say cistern, these are localized expansions of the subarachnoid space through which CSF circulate. Okay, we have what we call the cisterna cerebellomedullaris, which lies between the inferior surface of the cerebellum and the roof of the fourth ventricle, and the cisterna interpeduncularis, which lies between the two cerebral hemispheres. Okay, it is where you will usually see the accumulation of your your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, all the cisternae are in pre-communication with one another with the remainder of the subarachnoid space. Okay? So parang if you're going to imagine it, the fluid is actually just circulating from the higher centers or to the brain and then down to the spinal cord and then up again. Okay? So going to the spinal cord naman, the meninges of the spinal cord, it's basically the same because like what I've said, it is continuous with the meninges of the brain except the endosteal layer of the dura mater. So in this illustration, you'll be able to appreciate the different layers as you see here and then going down into the spinal cord as you see here. Okay? So the dura mater, like what is in your brain, is a dense, strong fibrous membrane that encloses the spinal cord and the cauda equina. Okay, so it is continuous above the foramen magnum with the meningeal layer of the dura mater and ends on the pilum terminale at the level of the lower border of the S2 or the second sacral vertebra. Okay. The arachnoid matter is also delicate, impermeable membrane that covers the spinal cord and lies between the pia mater internally and dura mater externally. So basically, the same lang talaga sila ng definition. Okay, so it is separated from the pia mater by the subarachnoid space containing the cerebrospinal fluid. And again, continuous above the foramen magnum with the arachnoid covering of the brain. Okay, and also ends inferiorly on the pilum terminale at the level of the lower border of the second sacral vertebra. Okay, so you will be looking at this picture. You have here the dura mater and then the arachnoid mater. Okay, so for the pia mater, it is also vascular, like what's in your brain. And on the either side of that pia mater is what we call the ligamentum denticulatum. It is clinically important and it is important also anatomically because it is where you will see the nerve roots, okay, of the cranial nerves. Okay, so it passes laterally to adhere to the arachnoid and the dura mater. Okay, so if you're going to look at this is a cross-section of the spinal cord and the vertebra. So you have here the epidural space, and then the subdural space, okay, and then the subarachnoid space containing the cerebrospinal fluid, okay. So the pia mater will terminate laterally or will go laterally, and then this will contain the nerve roots of your cranial nerves. Okay, so going back to the epidural space, later on we will be talking about lumbar tap or the spinal tap as they call it. Okay, for anesthetic purposes like for in regional anesthesia, hanggang dito lang yung needle nila. Okay, but if you're going to look into the CSF analysis of the fluid, of the cerebrospinal fluid, for example, secondary to infection, whether bacterial or viral, the needle will penetrate until the subarachnoid space to take sample of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? So now for the clinical correlations, you have to be able to differentiate where the bleed is coming from. Okay? For example, patient came in with loss of consciousness secondary to a fall or a vehicular accident. Okay, on CT scan or on X-ray, but mas maganda kung CT scan, you'll be able to appreciate the bleed kung nasaan yung hematoma. And you have to be able to differentiate. Intracerebral hemorrhage is different from intracranial hemorrhage as well as intraventricular hemorrhage. So when you say intracranial hemorrhage, from the word itself, cranium, from the bone, either malapit sa bone or the skull, either sa labas or sa loob ng skull. Okay, as opposed to your intracerebral, which is within or invested deep within the brain tissues already, or the blood vessels supplying the brain tissues, as you can see here. And also different from the intraventricular hemorrhage. Okay, blood supplies, the blood vessels that supplies your ventricles. Okay, so you have to be able to differentiate one from the other. Okay, and you'll be able to identify that using cranial CT scan, which is an imaging procedure. Okay, so let's talk about the different types of hemorrhage, intracranial hemorrhage. So we have the epidural hemorrhage. Like what I've said, the epidural or extradural space is a potential space. Okay, so for injuries secondary to blunt trauma or fall or vehicular accident, most likely that will be injured will be the anterior division of the middle meningeal artery. Again, because of its location. Okay, so it is caused by blow to the side of the head, fracture of the skull on the anterior inferior portion of the parietal bone. Okay, so there will be an increased intracranial pressure because of the edema of the brains secondary to the irritation. And there will also be an enlarging blood clot, which will exert local pressure on the underlying motor area in the precentral gyrus. Okay, so motor involvement is there. Okay, there will also be, sorry for the typographical error, swelling in the temporalis muscle. Okay, because of the hematoma again. Okay, so here you'll be able to appreciate that the bleeding, okay, is between the skull and the dura mater. Okay? Remember, for adults, of course, hindi mo madaling makita yung bukol eh. Kung magbukol man yan, maliit lang because of the superficial blood vessels. Pero pwedeng maliit lang sa labas, but deep inside, malaki na siya. Okay? Because, of course, the sutures of the skull in an adult patient is already closed. Unlike for infants na bukas pa yung mga sutures nila, either sagittal or lambdoid sutures. Okay? Kaya pwedeng lumabas dun yung bleeding or yung fluid, like for the cases of intracranial or hydrocephalus. Okay? But for adults, wala kasing ibang pupuntahan yan. Okay? So this one, skull and dura mater, in between that will be the epidural bleed, as opposed to your subdural hemorrhage, which is a result from tearing of the superior cerebral veins at their point of entrance into the superior sagittal sinus. Okay? Like what I've said kanina, subdural is also a potential space, but more of because of the formation of your dural venous sinuses. And when you say dural venous sinuses, of course, those are blood vessels vessels invested in that area, okay, specifically at the superior sagittal sinus. So if that area is affected, then there will be subdural hemorrhage. It can also be secondary to a blow on the front or the back of the head, which leads to excessive anteroposterior displacement of the brain. Okay, so remember the location of your superior sagittal sinus, right? It is in between the pulp cerebri. Okay, ngayon pag sobrang, for example, high speed na motor or vehicle, okay, yung sudden acceleration and then sudden na pag-stop, parang whiplash injury, pwedeng magkaroon ng subdural hemorrhage. Okay, because of that. Okay, and then the blood under low pressure will begin to accumulate in the postdential space between the dura and the arachnoid, okay, because of the tear of that cerebral vein, as you can see here. Okay, so this you see the torn cerebral vein together with the subdural hematoma. Okay, ideally or physiologically, dapat kayang makontrol yan ng sarili mo. Okay, or the defense mechanism of your body. However, pag masyadong malaki, okay, medyo mahirap siyang makontrol. That is true for your intracerebral hemorrhage. Okay? So you can see here also the compressed brain tissue, kaya meron ding loss of consciousness. Okay? And then here, in this CT scan picture, you'll be able to appreciate the subdural hematoma as pointed by the white arrow, as opposed to your epidural, as you can see here. Okay, so yung epidural, mas makakaikot siya as compared to yung hematoma, as compared to your subdural hematoma. Now, going to your subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is secondary to either a leakage or rupture of a congenital aneurysm on the circle of Willis, or less commonly from angioma. Okay, we call that subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, usually patient presents with sudden onset of severe headache, stiffness of the neck, and loss of consciousness. Okay, so here, hindi mo siya masyadong makikita via CT scan. Okay, mas ma-appreciate mo siya by doing lumbar tap for CSF analysis. Okay, because again, it is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Nandun siya sa subarachnoid space. Okay, so kapag ang tap mo or yung nakuha mong fluid is bloody, then you can consider a possibility of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Okay, so this one, as you can see here, the bleeding is within the subarachnoid space. Okay? Are we still good, class? Okay pa kayo?
Yes po.
Hello? Okay. So, kindly turn on your cameras for those who have good connections. Lahat pala kayo, nakapatay ang video. Nakakasad naman. Anyway. So, next. We have the cerebral hemorrhage. Like what I've said, you have to be able to differentiate intracranial versus cerebral hemorrhage, which is actually secondary to the rupture of thin-walled lenticulostriate artery, which is a branch of the middle cerebral artery. Okay, the hemorrhage will involve the corticobulbar and corticospinal fibers in the internal capsule. So mostly of these patients will present with hemiplegia on the opposite side of the body. Okay, so presentation will be sudden loss of consciousness and then paralysis once consciousness is regained. Okay, so here again is the picture that I have shown you a while ago, differentiating now the intracerebral hemorrhage versus the intracranial hemorrhage, as you can see here. The epidural, the subdural, and the subarachnoid bleed. Okay. Now, proceeding with my next discussion, and that is on the ventricular system. The ventricular system is very important because it is where your CSF fluid will be passing through. Okay, so it is a 4 fluid-filled cavities located within the brain. Okay, and it is lined throughout with the ependyma. The ependymal lining is very important for the production or for the secretion of your continuous secretion of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so the ventricular system is consists of the lateral ventricle, which is in each cerebral hemisphere, and communicate through the interventricular foramina with the third ventricle. Okay, the third ventricle is the cavity of the diencephalon and is connected to the ventricle by the cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. Okay, the fourth ventricle, on the other hand, is in the hindbrain or the hindbrain, which is between the cerebellum and pons and the medulla, and continuous with the narrow central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, so these are the different ventricular system of the brain. Okay, so let's focus on the lateral ventricles. The lateral ventricles is divided into body, as you can see here, which occupies the parietal lobe, anterior, which occupies the frontal lobe, posterior horn, which occupies the occipital lobe, and the inferior horn, which occupies the temporal lobe. Okay, as you also see here. Okay, so here is another illustration of the different parts of your lateral ventricle. Okay, so the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle is located at its floor, as you can see here, and projects into the ventricle to produce your cerebrospinal fluid, okay, together with your tela-choroidea plus the ependymal cells. Okay, next, after the lateral ventricle, we have the third ventricle, which is the cavity of your diencephalon. Okay, so it is a slit-like cleft between the two thalami, and it communicates anteriorly with the lateral ventricle through the interventricular foramina, and going down posteriorly with the fourth ventricle through the cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. Okay, the choroid plexus of the third ventricle is situated above the roof of the third ventricle, as you can see here. Okay, you know that you are at the diencephalon area because of this interthalamic adhesion. Okay, which is a connection between the two thalamus. Okay, so you know that you are looking at the third ventricle when you see the interthalamic adhesion. Okay, again, the choroid plexus is at the roof of the third ventricle. Okay, so the CSF will eventually go to the fourth ventricle by way of the cerebral aqueduct, or also known as aqueduct of Sylvius, okay, which is 1 centimeter long, connecting the third and the fourth ventricle, and again, lined by ependyma and surrounded by layer of gray matter, or the central gray, but without choroid plexus. The same ependymal lining, but without choroid plexus, as you can see here. So again, it connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. Okay, it's a slit-like opening, as you can see here, without, again, choroid plexus. Okay, and last ventricle, we have the fourth ventricle, which is a tent-shaped cavity situated anterior to the cerebellum and posterior to the pons and superior half of the medulla oblongata. Okay, so it is continuous above with the cerebral aqueduct of the midbrain and below with the central canal of the spinal cord. Okay, so in the fourth ventricle, you will be able to appreciate also the apertures. We call it apertures because they are the exit points of the cerebrospinal fluid from the central nervous system. Okay, so from the CNS, it will go out via the median aperture and two lateral recesses of the fourth ventricle, or the lateral aperture, as you see here. Okay, so from the inside going out here or here at this area. So that will be the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so that it will be able to bathe the entirety of the spinal cord and going up again into the CNS. Okay, so again, these are your ventricles. You have here the lateral ventricle for your lateral hemisphere. The choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle is at the floor of the lateral ventricle. And here we have the third ventricle. The choroid plexus of the third ventricle is located at the roof of the third ventricle. And then we have here the fourth ventricle with the choroid plexus around this area. Okay, together with its connecting points. Okay, the interventricular foramina here around this area, and then the aqueduct of Sylvius here. Okay. Now, after going from the CNS and then in the midbrain and then eventually going out to the apertures to go to your central canal. So that is the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid. So it opens, the central canal opens superiorly into the fourth ventricle, and it interiorly, it extends to the interior half of the medulla oblongata and through the entire length of the spinal cord. Okay, so in the conus medullaris of the spinal cord, it will expand to form your terminal ventricle, as you can see here. And remember, walang butas itong area na to. So the fluid will, by pressure, will just go upward here until it reaches the superior sagittal sinus to eventually be reabsorbed by the central nervous system. Okay, now focusing on the fluid that we were talking about kanina, when you characterize it, it is usually characterized as clear, colorless, odorless fluid produced mainly by the choroid plexus of the lateral, third, and fourth ventricles. Okay, some of which originates from the ependymal cells lining the ventricles, but primarily by the choroid plexuses. So the CSF is located at the subarachnoid space with a constant rate of production of 0.5 ml per minute. The pressure is also consistent to 60 to 150 millimeter of water, okay, with a total volume of about 130 to 150 ml. Okay, so these are consistent figures for your cerebrospinal fluid. That's why whenever you do spinal tap, okay, when you say spinal tap, you remove some fluid. We ask our patient to have supine position for at least 6 to 12 hours or 6 to 8 hours to stabilize the fluid within the cerebrospine, within the subarachnoid space. Okay? Kasi nga parang nag-iiba yung pressure kapag nag-insert ka ng needle at kumuha ng tap. Okay? So there will be what we call the spinal headache. We just usually manage it by asking the patient to lie in a supine position, flat on bed for at least 6 to 8 hours after the procedure, and hydrate. Okay? So this one will just illustrate to you the movement or the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid from the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle to the interventricular foramina. Okay, adding up to the fluid coming from the choroid plexus of the roof of the third ventricle, and then going into the aqueduct of Sylvius, and then into the fourth ventricle, and then out into the median and lateral apertures of the midbrain to circulate to the spinal cord, and then go up again until such time it goes to the dural venous sinuses, where you'll be able to appreciate your arachnoid villi and granulations to restore that cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, like what I've said, the choroid plexus is a combination of tela choroidea and the ependymal cells. So the tela choroidea is formed by the pia mater at the walls of the lateral and roofs of the ventricles. So it is highly vascularized, two-layered fold of pia mater. Okay, it fuses with the ependyma to form the choroid plexuses. So it provides support and attachment for the choroid plexus too. Okay, this one naman is the the ependymal cells. Okay, this is the spinal cord. The ependymal cells are usually seen at the fluid-filled cavities of the CNS. So it is the epithelial lining. Contains cuboidal to columnar cells containing also microvilli and cilia. So it is lined by simple ciliated cuboidal or columnar epithelium. Okay, so what would be the functions of the cerebrospinal fluid? It cushions and protects the CNS from trauma, provides mechanical buoyancy and support to the brain, nourishes the CNS also, and also removes metabolites from the CNS, as well as serves as a reservoir and assists in the regulation of the contents of the skull, and a pathway also for pineal secretions to reach the pituitary gland. Okay, so those are the functions, or these are the functions of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, this one we have discussed already, the physical characteristics and composition of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, and the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid as you see here. From the lateral ventricle again, to the interventricular foramina, to the third ventricle, to the cerebral aqueduct, to the fourth ventricle, to the two lateral apertures, and one median aperture, to the subarachnoid space, bathing the external surfaces of the brain and the spinal cord, and then eventually to the arachnoid villi to be resorbed into the venous blood of the dural venous sinuses. Okay? So this one is the dural venous sinuses. It is where you will see again the arachnoid granulations as well as the arachnoid villi for the resorption of your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, specifically at the superior sagittal sinus. So this one will just show you an illustration of the flow. Okay, that one, lateral ventricle, bathing the whole portion of the lateral ventricle to the third, and then the fourth, and then bathing the cerebellum as well, and then going up and down also to the spinal cord, to eventually upwards to the superior sagittal sinus. So that is the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? Are we still good, class?
Yes
Okay,
po.
wala naman nang nakikinig. Itutuloy ko na lang. Sige, for the clinical condition, like what I've said, we usually do lumbar puncture for purposes of CSF analysis for patients who presents with either bacterial or viral meningitis, or if we want to measure CSF pressure secondary to hydrocephalus or secondary also to infections, or if we want to do regional blocks for surgical operations to be able to block or to do regional block for like cesarean sections or surgical operations, exploratory laparotomies. Okay, so that will be what we call the lumbar puncture. It is usually done at the level of the L3 or L4 and L5. Okay, so the patient in a side-lying position or specifically in a fetal position to be able to open up the spaces, the anesthesiologist will insert the needle into the L4 and L5 or L3 and L4. What she will do or he will do to be able to be guided, she will hold on to the highest points of the iliac crest and make an imaginary line to be able to say that she is on the L3 or L4 of the patient. Okay, so what will the needle puncture? Of course, the skin. This is done in a sterile environment, okay? Because you don't want to introduce bacteria into the subarachnoid space or into the epidural space if you breach protocol with regards to sterility. Okay, so from the skin to the superficial fascia, to the supraspinous ligament, to the interspinous ligament, to the ligamentum flavum, and then to the epidural space for anesthetic purposes. But if you want to do CSF analysis, you will go deeper into the dura mater and then into the arachnoid and then eventually to the subarachnoid space, which now contains your CSF and extract or get samples from the CSF. Okay, so here, like what I have told you, important landmark when you want to determine the L3 and L4 will be the highest point of the iliac crest, as you see here. So the anesthesiologist or the operator will be drawing an imaginary line between them, okay, to be able to make sure that he or she is targeting the L3 and L4. Okay, remember that it's very important that the patient do a fetal position, okay, so that he will be able to open the spaces in between the bones. or the spinal cord. Okay? So the CSF pressure is usually secondary to infection. So increase in pressure will be most likely due to meningitis or an increase in volume of the brain produced by edema, tumor formation, or a cerebral abscess or presence of hematoma. Okay, so lahat yan magrepresent as increased ICP or intracranial pressure. If the fluid is cloudy because physiologically or normal characteristic is clear, odorless fluid, if it's cloudy, then ibig sabihin, a possibility of excessive quantity of protein is there. So, pwedeng viral yan. Okay? If increase ang WBC on CSF analysis, then it would suggest an inflammation, either secondary to meningitis or encephalitis. Okay? And kapag increase ang protein, okay, by CSF analysis, it implies a change in the vascular permeability. Okay? So when you say meningitis, it is the inflammation of the meninges caused by viral or bacterial infection. Okay, viral is milder because for bacterial type, it is actually toxic, extremely serious illness, and may result in brain damage or worse, death. Okay? Pwede ring fungi or chemical irritation or drug allergies. All of these may cause meningitis, but ang pinaka-toxic is yung bacterial meningitis. Okay, what would be the symptoms? Because again, it's infection, there could be fever. And then because of meningeal irritation, there will be headache. Okay, because of the edema or pressure, there will be stiff neck, brain swelling, convulsions. Because of increased intracranial pressure, there will be nausea and vomiting. Shock is already the late sequelae or late complication of your meningitis. Okay? So for the CSF patterns, depending whether it is bacterial or viral, madali lang naman. Siyempre, pag bacterial, we expect an increase in WBC count plus a low glucose. Kasi yung bacteria ang kumakain ng glucose. Kaya mababa siya by CSF analysis. For viral, protein usually ang mataas for viral meningitis. So that's how you analyze CSF. Okay, now what will be the signs of meningeal irritation? There could be nuchal rigidity and back pain, Kernig's sign, and Brudzinski sign. Okay, when you say Kernig's, it is the flexion of the hip to 90 degrees with subsequent pain and limitation with extension of the leg. So you try to flex the knee. Kaya Kernig's K, knee. Okay, pagka Brudzinski sign naman, involuntary flexion of the knees and hips after passive flexion of the neck. So it is the batok, Brudzinski, ang pineflex mo while the patient is in a supine position. So those are the signs of your meningeal irritation. Signs and symptoms of increased ICP includes headache and vomiting, bulging fontanelle or widening of the sutures. This is true for your infants kasi hindi pa sarado yung kanilang sutures. Cranial nerve neuropathies because of compression, hypertension with bradycardia, apnea or hyperventilation, stupor, and coma, okay, which are already late signs of increased ICP. Okay, so this one will just be an illustration of the signs of meningeal irritation. For infants, they have this what we call the opisthotonus, okay, or tonus of the entire body of the infant. Okay, for adults, we usually assess Kernig's sign as elicited by flexing the knee, okay, causing pain, and flexing the buttock, the Brudzinski sign, or the neck, and then there will be automatic flexion of the knees, like this one too. Okay? Another illustration. Okay, so for Kernig's, it is the knee that you flex. For Brudzinski, it's the buttock or the neck that you flex. Okay? To elicit the sign. Now, after our meningitis, hydrocephalus, this will be the last disease entity that we're going to talk about. Okay, the hydrocephalus is a normal increase in the volume of the CSF. Okay, what will be the causes? It's either because of excessive formation of the CSF or blockage of the circulation of the CSF or diminished absorption of the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? So, for infants, alam mong may hydrocephalus yung pasyente just by looking at her or at him physically because very evident yung enlargement ng kanyang head. And that is again because hindi pa close yung kanyang sagittal sutures or fontanelles. Okay? So, pwedeng dun lumabas yung fluid. Okay? But for adults, it will be different. Okay? So there are two types of hydrocephalus. We have non-communicating, which is secondary to the blockage at any points between the formation at the choroid plexus or at the exits or the apertures in the roof of the fourth ventricle. Okay, so it is usually associated with congenital malformations such as your aqueductal stenosis or presence of tumors within the brain. Okay, so that is for your non-communicating. For your communicating, wala kang problema with the exits and with the formation. There is no obstruction within or to the outflow from the ventricular system. The problem is it is associated with hemorrhages or infections. Nakakalabas na siya. Okay? Ang nagiging problem na lang niya is most likely the characteristic of this CSF causing the symptoms. Like if it's cloudy, syempre the consistency of the fluid revolving around the CNS as well as the spinal cord is different. Okay, so it has no obstruction within or to the outflow from the ventricular system. It is outside the ventricular system. Okay, so clinically for an infant, you'll be again able to appreciate it because of the non-closure of the sutures. So there will be increased skull circumference, tense anterior fontanelle secondary to the stretching. Okay, and then thin scalp with dilated veins or crack pot. When you say crack pot, imagine the pot pagka kinatok nyo siya na walang laman. That will be the sound of the skull on percussion. Okay, walang laman. Walang utak, walang laman yung skull. Okay, and then settings and appearance because of the lid retraction as well as the impaired upward gaze. Again, because of the pag-retract ng skin. Okay? For elevated ICP, we have discussed this already. Plus, of course, extraocular muscle palsy because of the affectation or the compression symptoms of the growing tumor or hematoma. Okay? So, the hydrocephalus can be acute, okay, causing irritability, impaired consciousness level, and vomiting. Or it could be chronic or gradual onset. Okay, malalaman mo lang siya because the baby has this difficulty to thrive. Okay, hindi siya at par with her or with his age group. And also there will be mental retardation as a late sequelae. Okay, so I think that would be all. Thank you so much for